We're live once again with your favorite Sunday morning show, Media Monitor, bringing you topical issues of the week. I am your host, Alicia Jali. I do promise a very packed lineup today as we observe that Parliament has now taken a recess this week. But what has it achieved so far? We get that update from our parliamentary reporter, Abra Barbia. NPA boss Sean Abraham sought to set the record straight regarding the spy tape saga and the Minister Pravin Gordhan investigation. And of course, I've relied upon Professor Stephen Friedman will help us in connecting those dots. But what are our children being taught in the classroom? We analyze the cartoon behind that question, because Zapiro is in hot water again after depicting Sean Abrahams as a monkey. SABC has taken a very strong stance on violent protests, and we also hear more on Reverend Tutu's pastoral license being revoked on the basis of her sexuality. And finally, we're going to wrap up the show by Africa Day discussions as we look at the modern African child. What does it mean to be a modern day African child? It's 9 a.m. Central African time. These are the news making headlines. South Africa has reversed its decision to block the accreditation of a press freedom watchdog for consultative status at the United Nations. In a controversial vote this week, South Africa joined a majority on the UN's NGO committee to vote down the application of the committee to protect journalists. The committee promotes the rights of journalists around the world while highlighting corrupt practices by states that could be harmful to the profession. More than 300 South African firefighters have left from OR Tambo Airport to Canada to assist with their wildfires. They will join the Canadian authorities to fight the raging forest infernos. The annual Comrades Marathon is currently underway. Close to 18,000 runners started this year's 89-kilometer race outside the Pietermaritzburg City Hall this morning. All right, and now to take us through what has been trending this week and this morning, I'm very pleased to welcome digitally savvy Ntswaki. She is an SABC current affairs producer. Ntswaki, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Alicia.
Now, Ntswaki, there was a lot of news content this week, but I'm going to let you do the honors. What was trending from Monday up until now?
Okay, so it has indeed been a very eventful week on the social media platforms this week. On Monday, we saw Hammanskraal trending. This after residents were protesting against an eviction there. 2 people lost their lives. And I just want to go through some of the few tweets here. Andile Mgqithama, who's the leader of the Land Fest, tweeted saying there is nothing called illegal land occupation. The land is ours. So those were some of the conversations that were going on around Hammanskraal. And then moving on to what was going on, again, there was Africa Day and there were a lot of celebrations there. People sharing pictures, wearing African clothes. I think, it shouldn't just be on Africa Day that we don our African regalia.
You're donning your African colors as well.
As it should be. And we saw Africa Day concert also, which happened yesterday, still trending this morning. Now, another big story that was on the social media platforms was the SABC. This after they made, the SABC made a decision that it will not be showing footage of violent protests. So a lot of people were saying, oh, this is censorship, and this is the DA. It has. The DA and the IFP came out saying that they're condemning the act. Of course, the ANC saying that there's nothing wrong with the SABC's decision. Now, I want to read just a few tweets on this one. This is Katie Katapodis. She says, SANEF believes the SABC's decision not to air violent protests is a deviation from its public mandate to broadcast news accurately and fairly. Now, Katie Katapodis is the Secretary General of the South African National Editors Forum. So, of course, her views are very important on this one. And then we have Tim Mudise, who is a veteran broadcast journalist. He also weighed in on the conversation, saying the banning of images protests by SABC merely shields the elite from dire reality of South Africans. Show critical and analyze. So these are the conversations that we saw under this topic, Alicia.
But is there any positive spin? I know we're going to talk about the topic much deeper with my guests in studio, but is there people that actually understand the cause behind why this decision was taken through the social media platform, Twaki?
Well, we looked at using different social media tools to see if there were any different, tweets relating to the decision. And I'll say that of the tweets that I saw, or the posts on Facebook, no one really came out in support except for the ANC. So we will see as time goes, and obviously the SABC giving reasons as to why they took the stand, that people perhaps might get to that understanding of, we understand why the SABC took this decision.
All right, and so okay, that's where we're going to leave it, unfortunately. But thank you so much for your contribution. We're probably going to have you, checking those stories out for us in the next week. Thank you so much for that. That is Ntswaki Shweshwe. She is SABC Current Affairs producer. We're back with more shortly after this. Now, Reverend Canon Mpho, daughter of Emeritus Archbishop Desmond Tutu, voluntarily handed over her ministerial license to the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. Her license was said to be revoked by the church due to her same-sex marriage, of which the church does not recognize. The Anglican Church in the country defines marriage as a union between a woman and a man. Reverend Tutu married her sweetheart, Professor Marceline Firth, in December of last year. Though the elder of the church, her father, and struggle veteran Archbishop Tutu, not shy of defending homosexuality, despite the stance of the church on the issue, he has been quoted as saying, "I would refuse to go to a homophobic heaven." All right, and now to unpack the story for us on the stance of by many churches, we're very pleased to be joined by Ubaba, Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa, who's joining us from our Pretoria studios. Father, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
Look, Father, what is the confusion to the average mind? The fact that our Constitution recognizes the same-sex marriages and the Constitution is understood to be above the institutions, including churches. Help us understand that grey area between the Constitution and religion.
Sorry.
You can't hear.
Could you hear us, Father? Yeah. All right.
Now I can hear. Yeah, I was cut off. I can hear you now.
Yes, Father. I'm saying please clarify the grey area for us there in terms of the Constitution versus religion. What is your stance on this matter?
Well, I move from the premise that all of us, our behavior is very much influenced by our family background, our religious, spiritual beliefs, by the influences under which we have grown. So therefore, we move from the premise that everybody recognizes the fact that there is gender reality, in this world. And throughout ages, different nations, different civilizations have always agreed that men and women complement each other. And many societies have accepted that marriage as an institution is the one through which men and women can bind themselves to a lasting union or a relationship. But obviously over the years, scientists have come up with some very interesting findings. Some of them maintain that some people, almost through their genes, are born with certain sexual orientations and so on. Do we then condemn such people, or do you find a way to understand why they behave the way they do? Finally, just to say that in African societies especially, definitely lesbianism and so-called homosexuality, I think is generally very much frowned down upon. With the result, therefore, that when we have a situation of a person such as the Reverend Canon engaging in a union of this nature, eyebrows are bound to be, of course, are bound to be raised, because it's something that we'll probably feel is controversial. But at the same time, having said so, though, we cannot really sit on judgment on the decision of two persons who say they love one another, because we do not fully understand all the reasons why they took that decision. Ours is to support, to interrogate, to debate the issue, and because it's a burning issue, whether we like it or not, all over the world.
Look, Father, I mean, laws change with times. And would you say this is now overlooking that matter? Can we use the term of discrimination here?
Well, in accordance to our constitution, yes, but the constitution, of course, does not cover the beliefs and the philosophies of everybody in the world. The constitution merely lays down the basic premises and parameters, and that's all. But the way we interpret the constitution, the way we live our own lives in our churches, in our political institutions and so on, that also has to be taken into account. What for me would be wrong and almost immoral is then to condemn such people, such unions, and to take more or less a superior attitude, morally superior attitude towards them, and therefore deny them certain opportunities of employment, deny them certain place of residence, simply because we say these are rather odd kind of characters and so on. That would be wrong.
Look, Father, I mean, her father, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, has publicly defended the rights of homosexuals and her in particular. Do you foresee in the near future churches softening up to their position?
I think only time will tell, because obviously the way people behave today is very different from the way they behaved 50 years ago, let alone 200 years ago. So there's this ongoing evolution in terms of the way people understand sexuality, the way they understand love relationships. So this is a matter really for debate. We'll wait and see. But it's quite interesting, and we cannot bury ourselves in the sand for fear of what people will say. I mean, let the future engage us. Let's engage one another. On a lighter note, I mean, I remember when I was at university, one of my friends comes to me, and he was almost in tears. So he says to me, look, Comrade Smange, man, one of these professors has been making advances to me, and I was so shocked. So I asked him, how did you respond? He said, all I could say was that, I'm sorry, Professor, I'm not tuned that way. So you can therefore see, so you can therefore see that people, that was his understanding, and that's the way he was brought up. For him, it was a shock. You see?
Thank you, Father, for that. At least we've gotten the biblical view. Professor, what do you say? Very good morning to you. What do you think about this whole controversy that she voluntarily handed over a license because it was going to be revoked in the long run?
Well, Alicia, I think, you talked at the beginning about the clash with the Constitution.
Absolutely,
the Constitution is very
yes.
clear on this. The Constitution upholds the equality of all people. And in fact, Father Makachwa said that it would be very unfair to deprive somebody of a livelihood because of their choices. Well, she has been deprived of a livelihood because of her choices. She's a clergy woman. This is her job. There is, of course, a battle going on this in various religious denominations and in the Anglican Church. And as you can hear from her father's reaction, there are increasing numbers of religious people who are realizing that discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation is not acceptable. I think this is a big human rights issue. Just as race is a human rights issue because people are discriminated against who they are, gender is a human rights issue. This is another issue in which I think humanity is beginning to understand that you don't discriminate against people because they're different to you.
Prof, I was just going to ask you, I mean, seeing that this could be a violation of a certain right, which route then would this go to in terms of trying to get reprieve?
Well, I don't think she would do it because I think she's probably quite loyal to the church. But if Reverend Tutu wanted to, if the decision was taken by the church here, she could refuse to listen to the church, and if she is removed, she could go to the Constitutional Court and say, my rights have been removed. And you could well have a situation in which it would be very delicate, because the courts don't like to interfere in religion. But on the other hand, if a person's rights has been violated by a religious authority, the courts may feel they have to step in.
But do you feel that churches need to change their stance on
yes,
such
I certainly
matters,
do.
Prof?
I certainly. It's an old-fashioned prejudice. Values change. What people, as Father Makachwa said, what people thought was immoral hundreds of years ago is not what we think is immoral now. I think we need to regard this not as a religious duty. It's an old cultural prejudice, and the sooner we get rid of it, the better.
All right, we're going to leave it there on that discussion. But now the SABC announced that it will no longer flight footage of violent protests. Is this, among other things, encourages copycats in other communities to embark on violent actions? It is calling on other media houses to follow this initiative. Here's more on this clip.
Because we believe that when people see the footage of themselves doing that on public television, they then encourage other people in other communities to think that for them to gather attention from us, they need to do the same. And at the end of the day, this is destructive, and it destroys property that belongs to the people of South Africa. We believe that when people are protesting peacefully and telling us about their plight, we will cover that. And we want to emphasize that very clearly, that we are going to continue to cover public service marches and public service campaigns that are there, the delivery campaigns. But when people are burning infrastructure, they are destroying public infrastructure, we are not going to show those footage. We will only show the things that are happening and the plight of the people and the reason why they are unhappy and all of that. We'll continue to do that. Therefore, it is important for people to understand that we are not saying that we are not going to cover the protests.
Let's go back to Pretoria now, Father Way. I think this is another issue of talking about moral issues here, but many people have probably misinterpreted the drive behind this decision. What is your view on this matter?
I think we must accept that each and every religious organization has a right to have its own rules and regulations, its own protocols, and when you assume a responsibility in that church, then it means by implication you are actually admitting, agreeing that the church can censure you at a particular moment if you go against the very rules and regulations that were made very clear when you participated. Now, that does not therefore in any way mean that the church or the people should then almost condemn such, people who take decisions that from time to time may be contrary to what the church stands for. But all I'm saying is that the church has a right to regulate its business, and those who believe in that church, who accept certain responsibilities, I think they should also then say, to some extent, they are limiting the exercise of their own rights. They're not taking away their rights, but the exercise of rights because of certain regulations.
Father, I'm sorry to take you back here, but we've moved on from that story now. I just wanted to get your views now on, in terms of the SABC's decision not to show footage of the violent protests. I mean, a lot of people have misinterpreted what the decision entails, but what is your understanding of this issue?
I personally feel it's rather almost unfortunate that the way it has been, or at least the decision has been portrayed, because it means that you are actually taking away the right of people, right to authentic, full information. If you start sanitizing information, I think you are interfering, in my opinion, with the right of people to know. I quite agree with the SABC that we should be very concerned about instances of violence, of of murder, of destruction, and so on, because that is not good for young people, is not good for the country as a whole. But the way you actually try to report that, certain instances of violence, it's up to the discretion, I think, of the SABC. In this particular instance, the way the decision seems to me that to some extent it goes against the rights of people, fundamental rights of people to know.
Prof, what are your views?
No, I agree with that. Look, in the media, there is always a debate. You know, you had Mr. Kanyago on, he's saying we're not going to suppress news, we're going to not show certain images.
Yes.
And this debate pops up in the media from time to time. Do you show images of violence, etc.? But nobody has produced, the SABC at this stage hasn't produced any credible evidence that seeing images of violence encourages anybody to act violently. You know, it's a bit like saying that because we saw the horror of people being shot at Marikana, that other people are going to go out and shoot people. There's no evidence to support that. And quite frankly, if we look at these protests on the ground, I think our problem at the moment is not that we know too much about them. We don't know enough about them. We don't know enough about who's doing this, why they're doing this. So if we're going to get to the bottom of this, if we're going to start hopefully making sure it doesn't happen in the future, we need more information, not less.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to leave it there. Let me thank Father Smangaliso Mkajwa, who was joining us from our Pretoria studios. It is time for a very quick ad break, and when we return, we'll bring you an exclusive one-on-one with NPA head Shaun Abrahams, and later we delve on the so-called offensive cartoon by Zapira, depicting Abrahams as a monkey dancing to President Zuma's tune. Do stay with us.
The IMC, which the President has asked me to chair, which deals with public employment programs, deals with matters that affect employment, EPWP, and we get sight of precisely what is happening throughout the country. The issue that you're raising had been raised in the past, and we have made sure that public employment programs are not used for advancing the party political interests of any party. And when the governing party, which is the African National Congress, set out its targets and objectives, that it will create 6 million job opportunities, and we're almost halfway to that target now. It was not aimed at getting its supporters into these programs. It was aimed at getting a plethora of South Africans to participate in this. And I'd like you to believe me that I have spent quite a bit of time going throughout a number of our programs throughout the country. And I often take time to ask people privately to say, are you satisfied with the way the public employment program is being run? And nearly all of them say, yes, we are satisfied. And they even go further to say the councillors who are here and the officials who are here are doing it on a very open and transparent manner, and they invite whomsoever in the community to participate. So that gives me a great deal of satisfaction. But I must say, however, Honourable Member, that you do note the comment that we have made. And as the IMC, we will make sure that these programs are forever utilized to advance the interests of all South Africans.
Welcome back. Remember, your views are highly appreciated. Let's hear them at SA Media Monitor. I'm still with Professor Stephen Friedman, recounting the stories that we debated upon this week. Let's now focus our attention to what kept us talking for the past couple of days. It won't be business as usual in the National Assembly when it reconvenes in August. Following a lot of disruptions, this week Parliament adopted new rules that are meant to ensure smooth running of its sessions. Speakers of the National Assembly had their hands full in trying to keep peace. Let's take a look at some of the highlights.
On a point of order, honourable members, can I just appeal to you? Order. Order. Honourable members. Honourable members. There is a motion that has been asked, and I'm sure all of us appreciate it's a matter of national importance. And I would appeal that we treat it as such and not trivialize the issue. We've got the last speaker on the podium. Order, honourable members. Order, honourable members. Mam Kawula. You know, honourable members, we do not dictate what parties decide on who their speakers are. So I would no, honourable member, I think all of us should respect that. Whatever views we may have about individuals, I think let's keep it to ourselves and allow the debate to proceed. Honourable Minister.
Deputy Speaker, sorry to interrupt the Minister. The Honourable Minister of Small Business has told members over here to shut up, and that has been ruled unparliamentary previously, the word shut up. I would ask you that she must withdraw the word shut up.
Honourable members, Honourable Minister, did you say that?
Yes, I did.
Please withdraw.
Yes, I withdraw, but they are not our principals. White supremacy is not in this house.
Honourable member, don't put conditions on that. Honourable members, let's proceed with the House, please. We shouldn't be doing unconditional stuff here.
All right, let's now welcome our parliamentary reporter, Abra Barbier, to give us a wrap of what actually took place in Parliament so far. Abra, a very good morning to you. Do take us through the new rules. I mean, how different are they from the ones that were implemented just late last year that achieved very little in terms of their objectives?
Alicia, good morning. First of all, I need to clarify the rules that were implemented last year were rules that were urgently needed to bring more control to the House. So those rules are not much different to the new rules book. They've just now been added to the new rules book. You have to remember, if I take you all the way back, a task team, it was decided in 2012 that Parliament needs to review its rules, the National Assembly needs to review its rules, because the last time that there was a thorough and extensive review of the rules, I think this was around 1996. So there had been an ongoing process since 2012 where the Sub-Rules Committee was tasked with looking at where changes needed to be made, where rules needed to be tightened up. So it's been an ongoing process. Then, as you know, in 2014, we had an election period. After that period, we saw new MPs, new parties coming into Parliament, and they now needed to be brought on board this process. So when the process resumed, essentially they went back, looked at all the new rules to make sure that everybody was on board. During this time, as you are very aware, with the Fifth Parliament, things just got out of control, things got out of hand, and urgent rules needed to be put in place to deal with those issues, and those issues specifically deal with the decorum of the House. That was dealt with as urgent rules in 2015, and those, as I mentioned earlier, have just now been added to the new rules book. But now if we look at the new rules, essentially the new rules are, it's technical procedural issues. They look at dealing with very procedural challenges and are aimed to just give the National Assembly more one of the rules we are looking at now, we have a thing called motions without notice. And these basically deal with messages of congratulations or condolences that political parties want to put out there and have tabled. And what's happened over the last few years is that these motions without notice, essentially it's become a joke, because the slightest things are objected to. For instance, so somebody would stand up and note that a well-known South African or well-known international person has passed away, and they would then want to offer their condolences and have this recorded. And then other members from other parties would object to something like that. We would have a national sports team win an event somewhere, and a member from a specific party would stand up and want to note this and congratulate the team, and then somebody from the other side of the floor would object to that. And I mean, that's just frivolous, essentially. So those, the rules now tighten up that. So essentially, an objection needs to be raised by more than one party. And if it is not raised by more than one party, it will fall off. So that's one of the rules that we are dealing with. Also, there's been lots of talk about the dress code. Now, the dress code itself is not within the new rules, because new guidelines still need to be discussed in terms of what the exact dress code must be in the House. Because during the sitting of the Sub-Rules Committee, the word appropriate was thrown around a lot. MPs need to be dressed in an appropriate manner. And everybody asked, what is appropriate? What's appropriate to you might not be appropriate to me. To the EF, if it's appropriate for them to come in their overalls, to a traditional leader who's also an MP, it might be appropriate to come in his traditional way. So this is something that still needs to be dealt with. So the new rules came into effect Friday past, and essentially it's just it's to create a framework for Parliament for the National Assembly to work properly, to work better. And how this plays out, yes, Alicia?
I'll get back to you just now, Abra, because I just want to hear from the Professor. Professor, I mean, we were talking about just these very same rules that needed to be implemented in late November, and they were, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference. Do you think these ones will be effective?
It won't make much of a difference, Alicia, because whether these rules are a good idea or not, one of the parties in Parliament is not prepared to accept these rules, and has made that clear. So if you've got one party which won't accept the rules, then essentially what happens is that that party will continue to break the rules. I suppose what has changed is that previously that rule-breaking behaviour was sometimes supported by the other opposition parties. I think what you'll see now is that it won't be supported by the other opposition parties, because they've been party to these new rules. But unfortunately, if it's the strategy of some members of Parliament to disrupt Parliament, you can't really change that by changing rules.
But Abra, you know, the Professor speaks of acceptance here, and I mean, we know that all these parties agree to these rules jointly, but then we see totally different scenes unfolding in Parliament. Is there reassurance now in the new rules that this won't take place? And what is it?
Alicia, you have to remember, before these new rules were there, Parliament already operated under a certain law.
Yes.
It already had rules. And we saw what happened with those rules. So what's going to be different this time around? Yes, I suppose the fines are stricter now. You get suspensions for certain behavior. Will that be a deterrent? We don't know. When the rules were debated, when the rules were passed on Thursday, the one of the FF Plus MPs actually said that stricter sentences need to be put in place. Like he said, dock their salaries. So, yeah, we actually just need to see how this plays out, Alicia.
Thank you so much to our parliamentary reporter there, Abra Babia, joining us from our Cape Town studios. We're going to take a very quick ad break. All right, we still have time to go to this. There seems to be a sense of a lack of confidence of how the National Prosecuting Authority actually intends to handle the spy tapes appeal. In an exclusive interview this week with SABC's political reporter Aldrin Sampier, NPA boss Sean Abrahams criticized criticised the manner in which its investigation of this matter, together with Minister Gordon's, have been handled by the media, while he also sought to restore the general public confidence in the institution.
With the press briefing, you went at lengths speaking about how the media has treated the story around the SARS rogue unit, as well as the so-called imminent arrest of the Minister of Finance, and saying how this affected the economy. Why did you feel compelled to do that?
I was deeply disturbed about the way this matter has been ventilated in the public sphere. It certainly affected the morale of the majority of the citizenry of this country. The negative effect, the continuous comments in the media around this matter had on the economy of the country, and also from a social perspective. As head of this institution, saddled with the ultimate constitutional responsibility to decide who should be prosecuted and who not, I felt it was absolutely appropriate to take the public into my confidence and to clear the air around the issue, to eliminate any future possibility of speculation.
And what's the status of that investigation? We do understand that you've confirmed also last week as well that there was a docket that came from the Hawks, and you sent it back to the Hawks with guidance.
As you would have heard from my address earlier on, the role of a prosecutor in giving guidance is not just a once-off affair. There's a relationship. It's a toing and froing, and of course, at times instructions or direction is given. I cannot comment at what stage the investigation is, but I do call upon the public to be respectful of the institutions concerned and to allow the processes to be concluded. We will then, of course, certainly take the country into our confidence once the investigation has been concluded as to what the decision is or will be in respect of the matter. But I can give my assurance that no charges will be preferred against any person, nor will any person be the subject of arrest.
And one of those persons would obviously be the minister.
Well, that's, of course, the public has ventilated the issue around the minister, and that's why I felt it absolutely appropriate to take the public into my confidence, because the minister is the Minister of Finance, and the public was deeply concerned, around rumours of his imminent arrest, and I had to clear the air.
You also confirmed earlier on during the press briefing that the minister isn't facing any charges of espionage. Is he facing any other charges besides what has been publicised or what has been in the media?
The minister is certainly not facing any charges of espionage. I cannot comment on whether the minister faces any other charges. That determination I would probably only be able to make once the investigation has been concluded. And I don't know if the minister is a suspect in this matter, so I can't comment on that.
Prof, what do you think about this?
Well, as far as the minister is concerned, or the question of the appeal on...
The spy tape saga.
Look, I think that, sometimes our public debate just goes insane. That's the only way I can describe it. You have here a situation, we have a constitution, we have laws. A court has issued a judgment. The NPA wishes to appeal against the judgment. That is something which is built into our law. If you don't like a decision, you're entitled to appeal. Incidentally, if you look at the way our law operates, an appeal is not automatic. Mr. Abrams and the NPA will have to convince judges that he's got a strong case. And if he can't convince the judges, then he won't be able to carry on. But what we have seemed to be developing in this country is the idea that once the courts have made a decision which some people like, you're not allowed to appeal it because you might end up with a virgin verdict which those people don't like. I really think we're losing the plot in this country if we start putting offensive cartoons out about people and accusing them of being stooges because they use the Constitution.
My next question, Prof. I mean, the public perception that, Mr. Abrahams is now dancing to the president's tune. I mean, what does that entail? Do we not trust the very institutions that we take our matters to?
Look, Alicia, we should be critical of our institutions. We should expect the NPA and every other institution to serve the public rather than to serve political leaders.
Absolutely.
My point is that you don't do that on the basis of a decision to appeal. You could argue that the director of the NPA has a duty to appeal. The court said that the NPA was irrational. You could argue that if he simply accepts that judgment, he's saying, yes, we're irrational, which is not a particularly rational thing to do. So, there's a danger in our society at the moment. If we give the impression that the law is only here to produce judgments which some people want, then you undermine respect for the law. You should be able to respect the decisions of the courts whether you agree with them or not.
All right. Well, that's where we're going to leave it on that matter now. Zapira's cartoon depicting NPA boss Shaun Abrahams as a monkey was hugely criticized. The cartoon also shows President Zuma as an organ grinder and Abrahams dancing to his tune. The drawing is in relation to the NPA appealing the decision to, of course, reinstate the corruption charges against President Zuma. Zapira is by no means new to the controversy as he has since apologized for the cartoon. We're going to take a very quick ad break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that.
A lot of this requires lots of agencies to be working, lots of capacity, not just number of scanners, intellectual or research capacity, intelligence. Even if there are limitations, there's no place to hide. Today it's Panama, tomorrow it might be Dubai, tomorrow it might be another tax haven, okay? The info will come out. That's why we want people to correct their affairs.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. You can interact with us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. Now let's talk about the widely criticized, controversial and sensitive cartoons that attracted media attention this week. A school paper which depicted President Zuma floating in a pile of money raised some questions about what children are being taught in schools, especially in private schools. The pupils were asked to identify the man depicted in the cartoon and whether or not they would vote for him. The question carried 2 marks. Gauteng Education MEC Banyaza Lesufi has vowed to investigate the incident. Prof.
Look, I think that it's perhaps an overreaction. I mean,
on whose part, Prof?
On the part of the MEC, because look, if it was presented in a way in which the learners were not allowed to express their opinion, I think it would be legitimate. But if I understand the issue correctly, if you are a learner, for example, who is offended by that cartoon, then presumably you're entitled to say that you're a learner who's offended in that cartoon. I mean, if that was tampered with, we would have a very serious problem. Of course, there's a question question to be asked about, is this really the way in which you want to divide your classroom? There are questions to be asked about whether this is sensible.
Would you expect this in a certain syllabus, though, Professor?
Well, you see, it's not a syllabus. The point is that what happens in these cases, because I know a bit of the way the school works, a particular teacher decides that it's a good idea, and if you speak to that teacher, you'll probably find the teacher says, look, we need to be controversial, we need to stimulate debate, etc. I'm saying that's okay as long as you are respectful of learners who are coming from a different place. If some learner stands up in your class and says, look, this is offensive, I think you're being nasty to our state president, I think it's important that that learner's views be respected as well. So as long as you can show that you're really stimulating debate among people and allowing both sides to be heard, then I think it's okay. The other thing is it would be interesting to see whether that particular teacher who did that is equally prepared to put in a cartoon or something expressing the other points of view. Because, of course, in education, you're supposed to give both sides of the story. So I don't think we should restrict educators too much when they try to be different, but we must insist that they're fair, and we must insist that they respect the rights of people with different points of view.
Now, before the break, I actually read this, that Zapira's cartoon depicting NPA boss Sean Abrahams as a monkey was hugely criticized. The cartoon also shows President Zuma as the organ grinder and Abrahams dancing to his tune, and the drawing is in relation, of course, to the NPA appealing the decision to reinstate the corruption charges against President Zuma. Zapira, who is no means new to controversy, but he has since apologized for the cartoon. Your views on this cartoon, Prof?
Well, how many times is this particular cartoonist going to publish offensive cartoons and then apologize for him? He does it absolutely regularly.
This is the debate, Professor. Is it freedom of speech? Because a lot of people have defended him, saying this is freedom of speech, and he's gone on to publish what he wants to publish.
You see, the freedom of speech issue is, should he be allowed to do this in society?
Absolutely.
Yes, of course he should be allowed to do this. But there's also freedom of speech for those of us who think it's offensive. So I'm entitled to say I think it's offensive. And I do think it's offensive because essentially what he's doing, and he repeatedly does this, is that he repeats the prejudices of a particular section of the population. And those of us who don't share the prejudices of that section of the population are perfectly entitled to say to him, it's unacceptable. And if these are such wonderful cartoons, if they are such wonderful expressions of freedom of speech, why does he regularly have to apologize for what he's brought?
Prof, then what is the responsibility of the editors in which such cartoons are being published? Should they allow it?
You see, editors don't like to pre-censor. I mean, we've had examples in the past. There was a man called David Bullard, for example,
yes,
in which people publish racist columns, racist cartoons, etc. What tends to happen then is if the media involved think that you've crossed the line, then they get rid of you. It's very difficult to pre-censor because if you start pre-censoring, then you give far too much power to various editors, etc. But it's perfectly legitimate for a media house to say, look, we think that you're offending people and we're just not going to publish your material anymore.
But you spoke about prejudice. How do we then make sure that these things don't appear in the public space? Is it not our responsibility as
No, I don't think we can ever prevent them appearing in the public space. If you start prevent them appearing in the public space, then you start suppressing it, then it goes underground, then it's actually worse for the rest of us. What you can do, and what we are doing, is speak out about it and say, look, he's got the freedom of speech, but he's not using that freedom of speech in a way which is actually fair to the majority of South Africans. I think it's perfectly acceptable to say that.
Professor Stephen Friedman, thank you so much for your views here on Media Monitor today. We're going to take a very quick ad break and we're going to come back with Africa Month discussion, and we'll be joined by musician Nomsa Mazwai shortly after this break. Do stay with us.
We'll be seeking a total ban on the trade in ivory, and we hope that you can stand with us as we seek to take this critical step to preserve the animals that contribute so much to our ecosystems.
Welcome back to our final segment. We're now talking about, we're still taking your views very quickly at SA Media Monitor. Now, Wednesday, of course, marked Africa Day, celebrated annually across the continent. The day reflects on the progress the continent has made in various fields and commemorates the formation of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, in 1963, which today is known as the African Union. And of course, on this topic, we're very pleased, like I said, to be joined by musician Nomsa Mazwai.
Nomi Superstar.
Nomi Superstar. Okay, Nomi Superstar, thank you so much for joining us. A very good morning to you.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, Professor, and it seems we're going to still retain you for this debate because...
I'm afraid I'm not a superstar. Talk to the superstar.
Nomi, let's start with you. I mean, what does it mean to be the modern African child to you?
To me, the modern African child is an achiever, is taking advantage of opportunities. But I also think, and I'm taking from the discussion you're having earlier, I think it's important that we communicate a narrative that makes it possible for the African child to believe in themselves, to think that they can do anything. So for me, I totally disagree. I don't think Zapiro has freedom of speech. He has a lot of power in his hands, and that narrative can't continue to be articulated in the public space. I think it's damaging to the African child. I think it continues that narrative of African leaders are corrupt or Africans are monkeys. And I don't think young people should grow up feeling that way. So I think if we want to create the African child of the future who takes advantage of opportunities, who believes in themselves, it's important for us to be responsible as media.
Prof, what do you think?
We agree that it's an offensive cartoon.
I don't think it's an offensive cartoon. I think it's bordering on illegal. An African child's mind in a school, you are building, you are telling them what they can be, what they can do. I mean, just thinking back to high school, so many of the narratives that I got from high school, inform what I do today. So if there's that narrative in a school, I think Zapiro is dangerous. And I think that he should not be published. And I think he should go in front of some kind of a court. I think we can't continue to have racist narratives in public spaces. I think that cannot continue to happen. So I totally disagree. I don't think Zapiro is freedom of speech. Not every South African can publish a cartoon in a widely read publication. And I think he's abusing power.
Look, Nomi, speaking of narratives here, do you think there's enough emphasis then on the promotion of unity among Africans, starting here at home?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, take, for example, I was supposed to go to Ghana last week, and I couldn't because I didn't have a visa. And I don't think we should need visas to go to other African countries. I think that we should be unifying the continent, and I think those narratives should be the narratives in schools. I think that school teacher should have rather said, who is this president, and put a picture of another African president, I think we should start thinking about our curriculum and how important it is in building the future that we want. So if we want a unified Africa of Africans that believe in themselves, then that's the narrative that has to be in question papers.
With that said, do you think then there's enough emphasis on the day in particular?
I don't think it should be a day. I think it should be how we live. But I'm very glad to see what happened, this year. There was a lot of emphasis. I mean, at the Soweto Theatre on Monday, we're having Wally Sayinka speaking there. And I think this year really was inspiring for me as a young African. Last night I was at the baseline. Nakane Ture performed, Zonke, all the Malay, all the South African artists that I love. But I also got exposed to, singers from Reunion Island, from Togo, that I'd never heard before, that I didn't know about. And they were absolutely incredible. And I think the 90% by SABC Radio is also a step in the right direction.
She's absolutely Miss Current Affairs, Professor. What do you say on that?
I think where we disagree, I think where we agree on what these images say. We agree that it's racist, etc. I think where we disagree is, do you fight this by driving it underground, or do you fight it by taking it on in public? I think that's the point that I'm making. We both know that there is a huge amount of racism in this society. And my concern is that if we simply say that we're going to ban that racism, it's not going to go away. I would much rather that we confront it in the public space, as you are doing here, than that we say, look, because then we live in a fool's paradise.
We need more voices.
Because then we think that everybody is bought into a non-racial society, where sadly they haven't.
No, I think I agree with that. I agree with that.
Unfortunately, I'd love to continue with this debate, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Nomi, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, and thank you for choosing us this morning. Let's hope you make a date with us next week right here on the SABC News channel live at 9 a.m. for another informative hour of the week's top news as well as newsmakers. Remember, we are available on social and digital media platforms. Just look for Media Monitor under the banner of SABC News. M News is up next from me and the team. I'm Alisha Jali. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care.